Please, bring my daughter back.
Please.
What bring your daughter back to know about your routine?
Nobody's ever asked me that before.
Talk to me to know about your routine.
Someone's nose asks things they shouldn't, and I think it starts with my father.
She was worth $300 million on paper. She had a penthouse in Manhattan, a closet full of designer clothes, and a father whose name appeared on the cover of Forbes magazine 3 years in a row. But on a cold Tuesday morning in October, she vanished. No goodbye. No ransom note. No trace. And the only man who was supposed to protect her, the man her father had handpicked and trusted with her life, he was gone too. Both of them disappeared into thin air, as if the world had swallowed them whole. Her father, a man who had never once cried in public, stood in front of cameras that evening with red eyes and trembling hands. He said just 5 words, "Please. Bring my daughter back." But what the cameras didn't know, what the whole world didn't know, was that the story behind that disappearance was far more complicated, far more heartbreaking, and far more human than anyone could have imagined. Because this wasn't just a kidnapping. This was a love story. And like all the most dangerous love stories, it started long before anyone realized it had begun. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Ask yourself this: if the person assigned to protect you slowly became the one person in the world who truly saw you, who would you choose? Your family's expectations, or the only person who ever made you feel real? That is the question at the center of this story. That is the question that a young woman named Serena Montgomery had to answer. And the choice she made, quietly, privately, in the space between stolen glances and whispered conversations, that choice is what set everything in motion. What really happened the night they disappeared? Was it love that drove them away, or was it something far darker, something that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with the secrets her father had buried for decades? And here's the question that will stay with you long after this video ends: if someone you trusted with your entire life turned out to be hiding something that could destroy your family, what would you do? Stay or run? Think about that, because Serena had to answer it in the dark, alone, with no time to think at all. Serena Montgomery grew up in a world where everything was beautiful and nothing was warm. Her father, Richard Montgomery, had built his fortune in real estate and private equity over 30 years. He was sharp, calculating, and relentless. He was also, by almost every account from people who worked around him, a man who had not truly laughed since his wife died. Serena's mother, Caroline, passed away from ovarian cancer when Serena was just 11 years old. Richard threw himself into work after that. He gave Serena everything money could buy and almost nothing else. Private schools. Trips to Europe. A trust fund that would make most adults dizzy. But he never once sat with her on the porch and just talked. Not the way her mother used to. Not the way she remembered from the years before grief ruled their entire family. By the time Serena turned 26, she had a master's degree in art history from Columbia, a quiet apartment on the Upper West Side that her father paid for but never visited, and a growing sense that she was living a life that had been designed by someone else. She painted in her spare time, large canvases, mostly blues and grays, and she volunteered twice a week at a literacy nonprofit in the Bronx. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't rebellious. She was just lonely in the particular way that people surrounded by luxury often are, the kind of lonely that's almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't felt it. The kind where you're never actually alone, but you've forgotten what it feels like to be known. The threat started about 8 months before she disappeared. A series of emails sent to Richard's company. Vague at first, cryptic messages referencing old business deals, names that Richard dismissed as disgruntled former partners. Then they became specific. One of them named Serena by name. It mentioned her apartment building. It mentioned the coffee shop she went to every morning on West 72nd Street. Richard didn't tell her about the emails. He just showed up at her apartment one Sunday afternoon with 2 men in suits and a plan. He was hiring her a full-time personal protection detail. He said it was precautionary. He said there was nothing to worry about. He also said it wasn't optional. The man Richard chose to lead that detail was named Daniel Cole. He was 32 years old. Former Army Ranger, 8 years of service, 2 tours overseas, and 4 years working private security for high-profile clients after that. He was disciplined, precise, and built like someone who had never once in his adult life skipped a workout. But the first thing Serena noticed about him, the very first thing, was not any of that. It was that when her father introduced them in the lobby of her building and gave Daniel a long list of instructions, Daniel waited until Richard finished talking, looked at Serena directly, and said, quietly, "What do you need me to know about your routine?" Not what her father needed. What she needed. It was a small thing. But for Serena, it was the first time in a long time that someone had asked her that question. And something in her chest shifted, just slightly. She told herself it meant nothing. She was wrong. For the first 2 months, Daniel was professional to the point of being almost invisible. He was there, outside her door, in the car, at a discreet distance whenever she was out, but he never intruded. He didn't ask personal questions. He didn't make small talk unless she initiated it. He read the room the way people who are trained to read rooms do, quietly, constantly, without ever seeming like they're watching. But Serena noticed. She noticed how he remembered that she took her coffee black. She noticed how he always positioned himself between her and any door she hadn't entered through yet. She noticed that when she was on the phone and clearly upset, he would find some reason to step slightly further away to give her privacy, but he always glanced back within 60 seconds to make sure she was alright. One evening in December, about 9 weeks into the arrangement, she came home from the nonprofit later than expected. It had been a hard day. One of the young boys she tutored had stopped coming, and she'd found out from the program coordinator that his family had been evicted. She didn't say anything to Daniel on the drive home. She sat in the back seat with her coat still on and her hands folded in her lap and stared out the window at the city lights. When they got to her building, he opened her door the way he always did. But she didn't move right away. She just sat there. And after a moment of silence, he said, very quietly, "You don't have to explain anything. I just want to know you're okay." She looked at him. She said, "Not really." And he nodded, once, and said, "That's an honest answer." Something about that, the simplicity of it, the lack of pressure, broke something open in her that had been sealed shut for a long time. She laughed, softly, unexpectedly. And he smiled. Not a professional smile. A real one. That was the moment. Neither of them would say so out loud for months, but that was the exact moment the line between them began to blur. They started talking. Not about anything that crossed the line, at first. She would ask him things, genuinely curious. Where did he grow up? What was it like overseas? Does he miss the structure of the military? He grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina. He was the youngest of 3 boys, raised by his mother after his father left when he was 7. He told her once, carefully, that the military had given him the first experience of his life where the rules were the same for everyone, where how hard you worked actually determined what happened to you. He said it simply, with no self-pity, the way people talk about things they've fully made peace with. She told him about her mother. About the paintings. About how she sometimes felt like she was living a life on display that had nothing to do with who she actually was. He listened the way very few people in her life had ever listened, completely, without waiting for his turn to speak. By February, she knew she was in trouble. She wasn't naive. She understood exactly what this was and exactly why it couldn't happen. He worked for her father. The professional and personal wars between them were not suggestions, they were load-bearing. And yet, when he wasn't around, she noticed. When he said goodnight and went to his post, there was a weight to the silence he left behind that hadn't been there before. She started leaving her door open longer when she was saying goodbye for the evening. He started finding small reasons to linger. Neither of them named it. But it was there, building slowly in the space between them like a storm you can feel before you can see. In March, she asked him something she had no right to ask. She said, "Do you ever think about what your life looks like when this is over?" He was quiet for longer than usual. Then he said, I try not to. But lately, yes. She didn't ask him to say more. She didn't need to. They both knew what he meant. 3 days later, in the kitchen of her apartment at 10 in the evening, when she had made tea and handed him a mug because he was staying later than usual due to a schedule change, their hands touched on the handle. They both went still. Neither of them pulled away. And in that small, quiet kitchen with the city humming 12 floors below them, something was silently decided between them. If you've ever been in a moment like that, where everything shifts and you know, in your bones, that there is no going back, then you know exactly what they were both feeling right then. What would you have done in that moment? Think about it honestly. If this story has you completely gripped right now, drop a comment down below and let us know, are you Team Serena and Daniel, or do you think she should have walked away? We want to hear from you. Don't go anywhere, because what happens next is the part nobody saw coming. For 6 weeks, they tried to keep it buried. They went back to professional. They kept their distances correct, their words appropriate, their expressions neutral whenever anyone else was around. But the truth has a way of pressing against the walls you build around it. It doesn't care how reasonable your reasons are for containing it. It just presses. One evening when Richard stopped by Serena's apartment unexpectedly, something he almost never did, he found Serena and Daniel sitting at her kitchen table looking at photos on her laptop of a conservation program she was considering supporting. It was entirely innocent. They weren't even close to each other. But Richard Montgomery had built his empire on reading rooms, and what he read in that kitchen landed on him like a stone. He didn't say a word about it that night. He said hello to his daughter, asked a few questions about her week, and left. But on the drive back to his office, he called his head of security. By morning, there was a plan. Richard didn't confront Serena. He confronted Daniel. He called him into his office on a Monday morning, closed the door, and without raising his voice, because Richard Montgomery never needed to raise his voice, he made himself absolutely clear. Daniel was given 2 weeks' notice, a generous severance, and a strong, unambiguous suggestion that he redirect his professional future toward clients who had nothing to do with this family. Daniel accepted the termination without argument. He was a man who understood structure, who understood the hierarchy of the world he operated in. But that evening, he called Serena. It was the first time he had ever called her. His voice was steady when he told her what had happened. Hers was not steady when she responded. She said one thing, very quietly. She said, "Did you agree with him?" And after a pause, Daniel said, "No." That was all. That single, quiet word. But it changed everything that happened next. Serena went to see her father the following morning. She sat across from him in his office on the 44th floor with its view of all of Manhattan below, and she told him the truth. Not dramatically. Not with accusations. Just clearly and calmly, in the direct way that people speak when they have finally stopped being afraid of a conversation. She told him that she cared about Daniel. That she was aware of how it looked, and that she didn't care how it looked. She told her father that she had spent 26 years living inside the shape of his expectations and she had been quietly disappearing inside that shape for years. She was not asking his permission. She was telling him. Richard listened with his hands flat on the desk and his expression completely controlled. When she finished, he said, "You don't understand what that man's presence in your life could cost." She asked him what he meant. He told her to go home. She went home. She called Daniel. She told him everything. And for the first time, they talked not as a client and a protector but as two people who had both come to the edge of a decision and were trying to figure out if they were brave enough to step off. They were on the phone for 3 hours. At the end of the call, they made a plan. Nothing drastic. Nothing dramatic. They would simply spend time together openly, as two adults. They would take it slowly. They would not hide. It seems like such a reasonable plan, looking back. But what neither of them knew, what Serena absolutely did not know, was that her father's warning hadn't been about propriety. It hadn't been about class or appearances or wounded pride. Richard Montgomery had said, You don't understand what that man's presence could cost, because he knew something about the people sending those threat emails that he had never told his daughter. And that secret, the thing Richard had been carrying alone for 15 years, was about to find all of them. The emails to Richard's company had begun escalating again in February, right around the time Serena and Daniel had grown closer. By April, they were no longer vague. One of them included a photograph. It was taken from a distance, grainy, through what appeared to be a long lens. It showed Serena and Daniel walking together on a path in Central Park on a Sunday afternoon. They were not touching. They were not even particularly close together. But someone had been watching. And whoever it was, they had sent that photograph to Richard with a single line of text beneath it: "You know what we want. Stop protecting what doesn't belong to you." Richard finally called in the FBI. He sat in a conference room with 3 agents and told them a version of the story. An old business deal gone wrong. A former partner who felt cheated. He gave them names, documents, a paper trail going back to 2009. But even then, even with federal agents in the room, he did not tell them everything. Because the full truth, the whole truth, would not just expose him. It would destroy him. And Richard Montgomery had spent his entire adult life making sure nothing and no one could destroy him. Meanwhile, Serena and Daniel had settled into something quiet and genuine. He had found temporary work through a private security consultancy, clients unrelated to the Montgomerys. They had dinner twice that week. He met one of her friends from the nonprofit, a warm woman named Tosha, who shook his hand and later texted Serena, "He looks at you like you're something worth protecting even when no one's watching. You better keep him." Serena read that text standing in her bathroom and cried a little, the way you cry when something someone says reaches the exact part of you that has been waiting to be seen. She thought that maybe, finally, things were going to be okay. She was still thinking that 3 days before they disappeared. It was a Thursday evening in late October when Serena got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. She didn't. The voice on the other end was a woman. Calm. Deliberate. She said, "My name is Vivian Cross. I don't expect you to know that name. But your father does. And if you want to understand what is actually happening around you right now, you need to meet me. Tonight. Alone." Serena's first instinct was to hang up. Her second instinct, the one she acted on, was to call Daniel. He was at her apartment within 20 minutes. They sat together at her kitchen table and Serena played the voicemail on speaker. Daniel's expression shifted in a way she had rarely seen, not alarmed, exactly, but deeply focused, the way his face went when his training took over. He said he knew the name Vivian Cross. Not personally. But the name had come up in a background briefing he had received when he was first hired for Serena's protection, a briefing that Richard's head of security had given him but had clearly not given in full. Daniel had been told Vivian Cross was a former business associate, a name to be aware of. He had not been told why. He pulled out his phone and spent 20 minutes doing what he could with the tools available to him. What he found was partial, fragmented, but enough. Vivian Cross had been Richard Montgomery's partner, not just in business. In everything. For almost 4 years, beginning in 2007. And the company they had built together, a real estate development firm with significant holdings in 3 states, had collapsed in 2011 under circumstances that the public record described vaguely as restructuring, but that several sealed court documents, which Daniel found references to through a legal database, suggested were something else entirely. Vivian Cross had lost nearly everything. Richard Montgomery had not. They decided to meet her. Daniel insisted on coming. Vivian had said alone, but Serena was not willing to go without him, and Daniel was not willing to let her. They met Vivian at a small restaurant in Brooklyn, a place deliberately ordinary, the kind with plastic menus and fluorescent lighting and a back corner table that no one else cared about. Vivian Cross was in her mid-50s, thin, with the kind of composed face that suggested she had survived enough to stop being surprised by anything. She looked at Daniel when they sat down and said, "I knew your firm hired you. I also know you were let go." Then she looked at Serena and said, "What I'm about to tell you is not easy. But you need to hear it because the people who have been threatening your father are not going to stop. And the reason they are not going to stop is because your father owes them something he has refused to give for 12 years. What Vivian told them, over the next hour and a half, was this. In 2010, Richard Montgomery had made a decision to shield certain assets from a real estate development deal that had gone wrong, a deal involving not just Vivian but a third party, a private investment group whose principals were not the kind of men who accepted losses quietly. Richard had restructured the company in a way that protected his own holdings and left Vivian and the investment group exposed. Vivian had eventually rebuilt her life, at enormous personal cost, and had made her peace with what Richard had done. The investment group had not. The emails were from them. The photograph from Central Park was from them. And the line in the most recent message, "Stop protecting what doesn't belong to you," was not about Serena's relationship with Daniel. It was directed at Richard himself. It was a reference to assets he had been quietly holding in Serena's name for years, assets he had transferred into her trust to shield them from legal exposure, assets that technically, legally, the investment group had a claim to that Richard had been burying under layers of corporate structure for over a decade. Serena sat very still as Vivian finished speaking. Daniel's hand found hers under the table. She let it stay. She asked Vivian one question. She said, "Does he know they've been watching me specifically?" Vivian said, "He's known for months." Serena was quiet for a long time after that. She thought about the Sunday he had arrived at her apartment with men in suits, telling her not to worry, telling her it was just precautionary. She thought about all the things he had never told her. She thought about her mother, who had died when Serena was 11, and how in the years after that, this man, this brilliant, driven, unavailable man, had been the only parent she had. She thought about how much she had wanted, her whole life, for him to simply be honest with her. Think about how that must have felt, learning that the danger surrounding you was created by your own father's choices, choices he never shared with you. Could you forgive that? Do you know how you'd feel if that were your parent? There is no right answer. But that question sat in Serena's chest like a stone that night, and it was still there when she got home. That night, someone followed them back from Brooklyn. Daniel spotted it 3 blocks from the restaurant, a dark SUV, maintaining distance but making the same turns. He didn't tell Serena immediately. He changed their route twice. The SUV adapted. He called it into a contact at the consultancy he was now working with. He told Serena when they were inside her building with the door locked. Her face went pale, then still. She said, very quietly, "What do we do?" He said, "We don't stay here tonight." She packed a bag in 11 minutes. They left through the building service exit. And that was the last night anyone who knew them saw either of them for 11 days. Those 11 days are the part of this story that gets described in shorthand as the disappearance. But from inside those 11 days, it was something different. It was 2 people trying to make sense of an impossible situation while also, quietly, finally, without any interference from the world they had come from, learning who each other actually was. Daniel had a contact, a former colleague from his Ranger days, a man named Marcus who lived off-grid in rural Virginia and who had helped more than one person disappear quietly for a short period when disappearing was the safest option. They drove through the night. They arrived at a small house surrounded by trees and cold air and the kind of silence that cities never have. Serena sat on the porch the first morning and watched the sun come up over the tree line and felt, for the first time in months, like she could breathe. Daniel contacted the FBI directly during those 11 days. Not through Richard's channels. Through his own. He had the documentation Vivian had shared with them, supplemented by what he had found himself. He handed it over completely, without conditions. The investment group, 3 men whose names are still part of an ongoing legal proceeding, were identified, their surveillance operation exposed, their assets frozen. Richard Montgomery was interviewed by federal investigators. The full picture of the 2010 restructuring was entered into the record. Richard was not criminally charged, the legal exposure was civil, not criminal, though the civil consequences were significant, but the assets held in Serena's name were the subject of a settlement that Richard ultimately had to agree to. He lost a great deal. Not everything. But a great deal. Serena came home on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after she left. She looked tired and clear-eyed in equal measure. Her father was waiting at her apartment. He looked older than she had ever seen him. They sat across from each other in her living room for a long time before either of them spoke. What was said between them that morning has never been shared publicly, because some conversations belong only to the people who have them. What is known is that Serena did not cut her father off. She did not disappear from his life. But something between them changed permanently. It shifted into something more honest, more guarded in some ways, and in other ways more real than it had ever been. Richard Montgomery, the man who had never cried in public, reportedly cried that morning. Whether from shame or relief or grief or love, or all of those things at once, no one outside that room can say. As for Daniel, 6 months later, they were still together. He had gone back to security work, independent, on his own terms, with the kind of professional reputation that the FBI corporation had quietly, significantly improved. Serena had started a new chapter at the literacy nonprofit, taking a leadership role. She still painted. The canvases, people who visited her apartment noted, had changed. More color. More warmth. A little less gray. She told a close friend that what she had learned, not from the danger, not from the dramatic parts of the story, but from the quiet 11 days in the house surrounded by trees, was that the life you are handed and the life you actually want are two different things, and choosing the second one is not betrayal. It is survival. It is the most honest thing a person can do. There is something in that worth sitting with. How many of us have spent years living inside the shape of someone else's expectations? How many of us have mistaken someone's control for their love? How many of us have been protected in ways that were actually about the person protecting us, not about us at all? Serena Montgomery had everything and felt nothing, until she had almost nothing and felt everything. That is not a coincidence. That is the oldest lesson in the oldest stories. The things we truly need have almost never been the things we were told to want. Now we want to hear from you. If you were in Serena's position, learning that the threat on your life came from your own father's buried secrets, could you forgive him? Would you? And what about Daniel, a man who walked away from the job he was paid to do because what he felt was real? Do you believe that kind of love, the kind that starts where it's not supposed to start, can last? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We genuinely read them. Some of your comments on our last video had us emotional, and this story deserves the same honest conversation. And if someone you love is watching this with you right now, send this to them. Because some stories are better felt together. And if you think this story moved you, wait until you hear what happens in our next folktale, a mother who gave everything to raise her son, only to discover on the day of his wedding that she had been replaced by a secret that was older than he was. That story is coming very soon. Make sure you subscribe so you are right here when it drops. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. That means more than you know,